As you know, I like very much to start with a bit of science here. So shall we indulge in that? Dearly beloved Papa, those in your loving keeping. You may possibly remember that when we started off yesterday morning, I was telling you that there were a couple of main things that happened to sort of spur me into remembering that it was the 50th anniversary last year, not only of when Baba had the accident in Oklahoma, but also when we from the West Coast went out to New York to meet him, and I saw him for the first time face to face, and at the end of that meeting, he told Ivy Deuce, and I got involved at that time, that soon he would be sending out this book which he had agreed to help edit, which is God Speaks. So it was 50 years at that point since Baba got me very, very deeply involved in working on his words, and of course continues on to this day. At that particular beginning, when I said there is, however, a second principal spur that occurred to me, but I said I prefer to tell you about that, and perhaps at the start of today. So I do want to tell you about it. It is not especially a happy matter, so I hope you're just all braced for not big smiles and cheers and laughter and so on this, and dead serious and a rather painful matter. I go back perhaps 3-4 years ago, before today, at a time when the amount of quoting, so-called, of MeherBaba, and quoting as different individuals would interpret it, and various things would appear in print also. And every once in a while they were starting to get so far away from things that I'm not supposed to be an authority on these things, and I don't pretend to be. But you know, when you've actually worked with Baba and Arish continually and repetitively on some of these things, sort of you get the general ideas and the tone and the atmosphere drilled into you. So about that point I was starting to get rather upset as to what was going on. The reinterpretation, as I've usually called it, of Baba's words. I remember on one particular occasion something had come out and gone public in a great many directions. It was so contrary to what Baba had laid out very, very clearly, and that I had to go over repeatedly, that I just really felt sick at heart. So again, one of those circumstances where I just sort of blew my top and said to the walls of my room, Baba, for heaven's sake, what is going on here? I didn't expect anything from this explosive remark of Don Stevens, but by that time it no longer embarrassed me to do these things a little bit out loud, you know, even if somebody might be listening in not too far away. So as soon as I said this, then just as I explained to you yesterday, 4 times now, I have definitely the distinctive feeling that words formed in the back of my head, which were so characteristic of the manner in which Baba would express things constantly to me during the course of the years, that on these 4 occasions I just said to myself instantly, this has to be Baba, and this has to be important, because I don't expect this sort of thing. I've not looked for it, I've not tried to promote it. Now, I have to warn you what I'm going to tell you now. I'm going to paraphrase the words that came through. I'm not going to try to quote them for a variety of reasons. But I do want to warn you that when we discuss this, as we certainly will during the course of today, I do not want to go into geography, and I do not want to go into names at all. This is too touchy a subject, and I just don't want any finger pointing to go on. And I don't want to be instrumental in people speculating who is Don talking about, or who was the person or persons that probably Baba named in those 2 or 3 very terse sentences that Don seemed to feel he heard from Baba. So, at any rate, I say, Baba, for heaven's sake, what is going on here with your words? And so, Baba brought up immediately something to do with what I would simply call the Judas function. He used the term Judas, and I call it the Judas function. And I've always had the feeling, since that particular morning, that it is a good deal more widespread than it was perhaps in the time of Christ, where it was centered in one individual. But of course, some people have more of a penchant for doing these things than others. So the thing that formed in the back of my head was, this is the operation of the Judas function, and this time it will be my words which will be betrayed. Well, you know, as soon as that sort of registered clearly on my mind, 2 things happened. One was I was really deeply shocked, but secondly I just said, Don, you have been so deeply involved with Baba over so many words on his words, inevitably this is where you're going to have to come front and center and do a bit of perhaps hard work and perhaps some rather distasteful work. Because it isn't nice to be branding around the term a Judas function and sort of leaving it lying, and maybe the finger, and maybe one has an immediate tendency to point to that person. Oh, well, yes, they're constantly doing this sort of thing, and maybe this is one of the Judases involved. There's been a fair amount of speculation already in print in relation to the Judas function, and a few people named here and there, or even Mondally. Once when I think a finger was pointed at dear old Gustagi, I rose up in rebellion because I knew Gustagi awfully well from the time I first met him in 1952 in New York City. And he adopted me, by the way. And so every time that, until he passed on, that I would be around, he always had one main function after, you know, a lot of smiling, which he was doing all of the time. And when I would crouch down in the corner, you know, and Baba would be giving out some words to the assembled people, very often in Mondley Hall, then Gustagi would come along behind me and he'd sort of nudge me and smile at me. He'd get me a little bit closer. After about 10 of these nudgings, I was all sitting right in front of Baba himself. Then Gustagi would retire from his occupation. So you see, with that sort of love and marvelous treatment, it sort of pains you if there's any association with anything that starts with J unless it's John. So Gustagi was a real special pet. But this made sense to me when those words formed in the back of my mind. That it would be his words which are betrayed. Bridges. And they made some wonderful contributions, so it's not just, I did the original draft of it, yes, but then people chipped in, and it was awfully good chipping in. And I did not say to anybody, because when we were doing that, I hadn't even thought about possibly bringing up the Judas function. So I must say that when I sat down for the first time in London, we did our trial balloon, and I was getting on into the gist of it. I suddenly realized, good heavens, Don, there are actually 2 things that prompted you to put together, to spearhead a series of seminars on Baba's words. And the second one was that by that time it was the 3rd of these sort of internal hearing Baba's words. And if you are going to follow what Baba very clearly outlined about absolute honesty, which he harped on and harped on, then you're going to have to include something about the Judas function. You cannot go in front of Baba's devotees. People feel how deeply they love him and fail to give one of the two terribly important things that has spearheaded this. It would betray what Baba clearly explained in New York in 1952 that he meant by absolute honesty. Peeler, do you think this is the point where I ought to outline that? I think probably you've read a little bit about that occasion in Ivy Deuce's apartment in 1952 in New York City on Sunday afternoon. We talked to him in the morning about Sufi affairs and so on. We went over that yesterday. But I didn't bring up the honesty part of it because we're getting a little bit late in the day. But I think this is the point where we need to bring it front and center. Baba had, I think I've got it in here, maybe you could find it, sort of a photocopy of a sheet from the Sufis, the Sufi Chartered Guidance for Sufism New York. And there are seven things that one had to swear to be willing to try to apply in their lives. So that was being drafted rather early along in the game, even before Mayor Baba came to New York. And amongst others, we knew roughly what he was going to include there. I hope I haven't left it out. We knew that one of the things that are all these sort of things, you know, not carnal lust and things of that sort. That is absolutely it. Sacrifice, no material ambitions, long for one thing, truth. Avoid greedy longings, cope with feelings of anger, fear, and hate. And then there was this one, but it wasn't in this final form as it was originally being discussed. To be able to avoid every type of falsehood. So when that sort of got noised around amongst the Sufis, of course, all of the women in the group, most of whom were mothers and had children, and you know, mothers have a very, very tough time sort of preserving silence on some things and talking about other things. And the things that they preserve silence on, you know, are supposed to be the things that if they were mentioned, you know, would get the child into absolute uproar or rebellion or something of that sort. So these sort of silences on the part of mothers are very well understood. And if all of a sudden, you know, mothers had to take the vow, which includes to be able to avoid every type of falsehood, and then you will listen to what I'm going to say that Bobby explained, and then you suddenly say, well, gee, I'm not sure I'm obeying my vow to Baba on this. You get into quite a quandary if you've got to go more deeply into things you've been used to keeping on the side. And then, of course, the husband, who was usually employed, and he's got a boss who's looking over everything that he does, and many times trying to find an excuse to get rid of if an excuse comes along. And the husband says, gosh, if I tell my boss anything about some of the things I think about, well, then I'm certainly going to get put out the door. So this began to be rapidly a very, very real problem. Mercer the Deuce in New York would get letters and telephone calls and personal visits and so on. And on out on the West Coast would get also friendly chats and so on. And Baba and Adi Sr. were getting mail on the subject of absolute honesty. So it was very early recognized that this was going to be a tough one. A lot more difficult even than the question of giving up lustful actions, you know. Isn't it amazing that people were more concerned about the disruption and the horrors in their life that would be precipitated by this one, absolute honesty. So, Baba wrote back, I think actually in late 1951, not long after he came out of the travel part of the New Life. And when he saw all of this stuff that was running around about people being upset, he said, well, now I'm shortly going to come to America, and so I promised the Sufis that I will sit down for as long as it takes one afternoon and tell you exactly what Baba means, what Baba means by absolute honesty. So here we were on the Sunday afternoon, this hot day, settled around, I think there were 8 or 10 of us. And Baba says, no, I will tell you. Now, I'm not going to try to say the exact words that he used, but this is Don Stevens paraphrasing of Baba. But I'm pretty sure that the central ideas are correct because they made such an enormous immediate impression on me. Let me give you a tiny bit of background here. I brought up so many times already the fact that my mother was Swedish, and that I'm half Swedish, and rather conservative and so on. But certainly one thing that I think about every Scandinavian I ever ran into when I was a kid was also made almost a personal fetish out of honesty. Gotta be honest about things. It just seemed to be bred into the temperament. And so my mother was that way, and we just assumed that this is one of the pillars of civilization and God and everybody else. So just automatically, you had to be honest, and you tried to, and it was just unnecessary. You didn't sit around and argue about it. You didn't say, where'd all this come from? Who put it up in the first place? It was there. And I enjoyed it, quite frankly, but even at that time, I had sort of become familiar with what everyone called the little white lies. Remember them? But that wasn't supposed to be a transgression on honesty. These were just sort of diplomatic things that you got into a corner, and you just had to use them in order to keep living and keep friends and keep civilized with other people and so on. It was sort of a working permit that you had to use the little white lies. So, but are you going to be able to use these little white lies? But I personally felt that I was an honest person. And when Baba sat us down and he started telling us, and I realized that I was into a whole different dimension. And what happened was that it became one of the central pillars of my own personal life. One of the things that I think I spent more time reflecting on than almost any other thing other than Baba himself. It was terrific. So Baba starts off and says, now, you've asked me to sit down with you, and I'm here, and I'm going to tell you what I mean. He said, let's take a typical sort of a case that you're often involved in life. You've got a friend, and your friend is having some problems in his life and somewhere, and he knows that you've been through some of the things that he's going through, probably even before he started getting involved in these complications. And so he's coming to you as a friend and asking you, can you tell me some of the things that you have found out about such and such a compartment of daily living problem, maybe problems in relation to family. So it says, now when your friend asks you to tell you what you know in this particular area to help him, you have got one immediate decision that you have got to make, and that is, does this friend have the right to ask this of me? What sort of handhold on my inner personal knowledge does he have? Or is this something that I should simply tell myself, well, he's a friend, but he's not a deep inner friend. He doesn't have deep inner connections, and he has no right to ask me about an important series of experiences in my life. In which case, if you say, no, he really doesn't, or there may be another judgment, you've got to make this judgment quickly also. If I tell him various things that I know about this part of my life and my experiences, will he be able to use effectively, healthily, what I'm going to tell him? Well, I've never thought about honesty in terms like this. The basic decision, do I say anything to him? So Baba said, when you face these two judgments, you may decide that no, he doesn't have the right, or no, he won't be able to use it properly, or maybe you'll decide for both of those reasons that you should not pass anything over to him. Baba said, you should not feel that this in any way contradicts, fails to follow through on any sort of a vow that you may take on absolute honesty in your personal life. This is a decision that you yourself make. And you have the absolute right to be totally silent, and Baba impressed upon us the fact that you just don't, use bald words and say, no, I'm not going to tell you, or something like that. Try to find a diplomatic way, but it will have to be essentially, no, for various reasons, I don't feel I should discuss this with you. Secondly, you may decide that, yes, this is a very close friend, I owe it to our friendship, and he's a highly intelligent person. I've got great confidence in how he meets problems in life and everything I've seen. And so, yes, I'm going to tell him all of it. And so all is all, of course. So you just try to share as much as there's time for and as deeply as you may be able to under the circumstances. But Baba said, however, these sort of situations in real life that you usually run into will normally not be all yes nor an all no. It'll be somewhere in between. Now this gets to be committed ground for you. So he says, now the statistics are Don Stevens' mind, you see. Baba didn't say anything about percent. He did say something about percentages, but he didn't offer a percentage example. But because I just got to sort of work this way, I'm going to use a percentage. So Baba says, your decision is that you're not going to tell them all, but you're going to tell them a goodly proportion. So Don says, well, maybe Baba's fishing around for a 60% figure. I'm going to tell him 60%. So he says, now, as soon as you start thinking over the sort of things that you're going to have to bring up in this frank discussion with your close friend, there are certain things you quickly see are rather negative, and they were very difficult and unhappy-making when you experience them in your own life. And maybe they still make you unhappy. And there are other things that come up in this particular subject. They're very pleasant, very positive, and you feel good about it. Your friend will be happy to hear them. So maybe, let's say, Don says, well, maybe we're in a tough sort of a case here, and maybe, even though it's tough, maybe only 10% of the general background is pretty negative, and the other 90% is rather happy-making. So Baba says, now, in the proportion of what you know that you choose to tell your friend, you must offer him and tell him a just proportion between the positive and the negative. Now, I make a little bit of a detour right here, because I've seen this conversation that Baba posed to us quoted in a number of printed sources. And people, strangely enough, there are two things that I've seen. Never say anything that's going to make the person unhappy. It's an absolute total. In other words, pick all positive points and don't bring up anything that's going to make them unhappy. You shouldn't feel that you're making them unhappy. Then another one is, give them a 50-50 proportion. One of the cleverest Baba lovers I've ever run into, who loves Baba dearly, but when he was quoting it to some friends in my presence, said, tell them 50% good and 50% bad. He said, this is what Baba said. Well, it wasn't what Baba said, but it's amazing how many people have gotten the idea that you should tell them about half of the good things and about half of the bad things. But that was not what Baba told us very clearly, that it should be a proportionate amount of the positive and the negative. And so a proportionate amount, if the positive preponderates, there's a great big chunk of the 60%, you know. In fact, should it be 90% of the 60% if you follow my original statistics, which are positive, and then 10% of the negative, you see. So that would be very little negative that would come through, and certainly not 50-50%. Yes, Adele.
did I miss when you explain that people will bring up this famous statement, don't hurt the heart of another. And then with that, they blot out everything.
Well, Baba did not say, and he did not imply that when he was talking about absolute honesty.
What did
nothing
we
about
didn't hear what did Adele say? What did Adele say?
Yeah.
What did Adele say?
Could you repeat what Adele said? Never hurt that Baba
Never hurt
said.
the heart of anyone.
Never hurt the heart of another.
Yeah. Certainly in this very critical situation where he was discussing not only, let's say, positive and negative points, but the feelings of the individual. He did not say nor imply anything about don't run the risk that you're going to twist their heart or draw blood or anything of that sort. Not at all. You know, life has got a lot of tough things, and if you're going to be honest, the tough things have got to be brought up. That was why when we were starting the trial balloon in London for this seminar, all of a sudden, just before, I said, my gosh, Steve, good heavens. I am about to commit mayhem and disobey completely MeherBaba's definition of absolute honesty, because I was about to suppress this whole business of the Judas function, which is one of the principal things that spurred me. And when I saw what I was about to do unwittingly, it just shocked the hell out of me. I couldn't believe what I was about to do. Well, that one's allowed. Mr. Pillar, do I allow that? That one's protected very much. So I was really terribly shocked at that particular moment. And so very spontaneously, I brought it up. And when a few of my co-workers who weren't there at that particular seminar heard about it, well then all hell broke loose on the internet, and boy, I really took a drubbing. In kind words, of course, but it was pretty easy to see what they were aiming at. So this is what Baba did. Linda, what would you like to add?
You're saying proportionate, when Baba said proportionate, that would infer that there may be different percentages of good or bad depending on person or the situation, right?
The personal situation, exactly. And the personal situation has an awful lot to do also with, I've always felt two critical things when one is really in contact with a person very close to you, an inner being, and that is choice of words, choice of timing, and choice of place.
Choice, what was the third one?
Choice of place. Yeah. I think this is one of the things that the individual has to take into account. And there we get into the business of what is going to be the squeezing of the individual's heart and real hurt that is involved. But I do not know of any way that one can or should apply Baba's definition of absolute honesty and avoid hurting. Hurting is involved in life. It's involved in so many of the situations that we've got to live through. And do you remember Baba saying that each time the avatar comes into creation, he deliberately takes on a certain proportion of the total load of suffering that humanity is going through. And do you remember that he said in order to do that realistically, the avatar sets aside his, you might say, birthright of all bliss. So he really suffers. Remember that. This is terrific.
Dinah has a question.
Dinah.
Well, about a year ago, Jeff Bain found a quote, and I can't remember if it was in Erich's book, that's the way it was, that's how it was, or if it was the discourses itself, but he asked me to have them, he liked the saying so much, he asked me to have it printed up on the cards that you give away. And the quote was, that which crushes the heart of another cannot be the truth. That which uplifts him is. And I said, Baba said that? And he said, yes. I said, well, I need to see it in writing before I can just put that out under Baba's name. And so he told me where it was, and I found it in either of these books. So you're saying maybe that's one of the things in the discourses that got a little colored over time, that he didn't say that?
Baba did not introduce anything that approximated that, Dinah. And I'm not saying that Erich is wrong, because I've only been around one situation where I felt, Erich, here, you're a human being and you're dead wrong. But certainly not on that one. Wow. But I immediately, Dinah, when you bring that up, one thing comes to my mind, and that is the truth, of course, is at the end of the whole series, isn't it? And Baba has certainly made it terribly clear that before we arrive at the truth, we've got a long, tough road to hoe with a lot of suffering involved. And so, there's going to be, before you get to the truth, or the truth in any particular subject, a good bit of suffering en route. And that's one of the principal reasons the avatar's around to help us.
I did think it was a little strange.
Now, I'm not trying to quibble and get out of Arish's statement,
Right.
but the final truth is there is no hurting or not hurting involved. The truth is just the truth.
Yeah.
And all bliss is what one has when one is fused with the truth. Ken, you had your hand up there.
Yes, just to try to keep this in context for myself. When you say Baba did say this, are you referring to this specific Sunday afternoon in 52?
I'm referring to this specific Sunday afternoon, but I'm also saying that in all of the time I was around Baba in many conversations, this aspect of the thing, you've got to avoid hurting other people. It never came up in those terms. It just didn't.
But does that mean that it wasn't said, or just as far in your awareness,
In
in your
my
experience?
awareness, in my conversation.
Okay.
I'm not infinite and I've been around for
No.
an amount of time.
Thank you.
I can allow one or two things to happen outside of my relationship to Baba.
Generous of you, Mr.
It
Stevens.
doesn't make me too unhappy. You had your hand.
Well, I think also how we coach the words, the tone of voice we use is important. You know, if someone is slobbering and they really need to wake up, instead of just saying, "Oh, you look like shit today," you might say, "You know, why are you looking at me?" Just as an example.
Something seemed to hit with Pam.
But is there anywhere in print or in words of I mean,
On this discussion of truth, no. I finally made a report on it because I realized that the few people who had been there that day were fast dying off. And although I constantly told a story around with different groups, I thought it ought to be in print, so I gave an accounting. After that, then 2 or 3 other accountings appeared in print. And as I said, the principal sort of thing that happened at that point was that there was the 50-50 statement that was made by a terribly intelligent guy, and another that you should never, never, never hurt the guy's feelings in anything that you tell him, implying that you weed out the negative thing. And certainly that was not what I wanted. So we go way down here. Is it the end of that, or you want me to read all of this? If we endure our love, we understand the greatest thing. Morton, Robin, false. Let's see, somewhere in here, there's something about honesty, isn't it?
The last one about not hurting or harming.
Oh, yes, if we understand and feel that the greatest act of devotion and worship to God is not to hurt or harm any of his beings, we are loving God. Well, hurt there, I would just have to lawyer over that particular word and the usage of it, because I certainly have been around a lot of family situations where I have known parents who tried to avoid any act that hurt their children, and I saw children who were unable to deal with real crisis in life. So in trying to avoid hurting their feelings, they hurt their child's ability to deal with real life. So reflect a little bit about 2 rather radically different meanings of the word hurt. I just suggest that to you. Thank you very much.
Also, if you like hamburgers.
Also what?
If you like to eat hamburgers. The
Sure.
essential thing, livering.
Are you sure we're not going to get in touch with McDonald's if we discuss it? But it's a very, very, what should I say, widely expanded term, the word hurt.
Yeah.
And yes, Nancy.
Well, I think this is very important because you're talking about a discussion with Baba where the actual subject was honesty and what he meant by it.
Yeah.
So I think this is vitally important. And I think a lot of these quotes, or this is what I heard you like, are from maybe private conversations. People that met with Baba and they would tell him certain problems, and he would give them advice or say something to them specifically.
Bless
and then
your
those
heart,
quotes
Nancy.
were lifted out.
Yeah.
and tribute to him. We should just say that when it was in a specific context.
Sure. Can I elaborate just for a few moments on what Nancy has said? I refer you back to something that Baba has said repeatedly, that no two souls return to God by the same path. It is always personal and different. Everybody that is sitting around here, and everybody I'm convinced who even knows the name MeherBaba is on the return path. And so inevitably, MeherBaba is going to say one thing to this individual who's on the path here. And Nancy over there, who's on the path here, he's going to say something a bit different. So if Nancy and this guy talk to each other, they're going to say, well, Baba told me something not diametrically opposed, but a lot different from what he told Nancy. It's inevitable, isn't it? One of Baba's greatest functions is to help us on the return path. And if it is that highly individualistic, then the words of suggestion or advice or comfort and so on have got to be different in every single case. Now, you may say, well, you're just trying to weasel word out of, people just say, well, obviously Baba contradicted himself again and again. But Baba did not contradict himself, but he gave different advice to different individuals with a different approach on the path. He had to. It's the only way it could be done sensibly. Somebody else had, yes, Adele.
Well, just thinking of the time that Baba to tell us that, how to bring him in like that dialectic, Socratic dialectic. You always bring the presence of God into what you're doing, saying, thinking. Then that ought to resolve this hurt business, because if something has to be said that is true, but with the presence of God, that means with loving heart, with loving heart, then it has to come out okay.
Right. Now,
I mean,
I'm glad you bring that up.
You bring his presence, and then it must come out.
All right, now can we tie that into what the result, at least for me, and I know for many other people, became after Baba gave that definition of truth, because of the fact that I had heard him give this definition in person, because I eventually had formally to agree to accept the qualifications for membership in Baba's reoriented Sufism. It was in that, and I had to know to myself that I had taken a vow directly to Baba. In addition to that, every time that I would come through India, somewhere or another in the conversation, Baba would look sort of beady-eyed at me and say, Don, is your president allowing you to be absolutely truthful in your activities? And I would always tell him very happily, because it was true, yes, Baba, my president always continues to allow me. And as I change presidents, I say, my new president is exactly the same way. But what all of this meant, now this gets into another dimension, and I want to suggest to you, every time I've been around Baba, I would become aware of the fact that if he seems to be shooting at this bird here with a particular thing that he is discussing, actually I end up finding in the very near future that he's been killing about 3 birds with that same shot. And yes, this is what he was talking about, but it would get a tremendous lap over into this subject and a tremendous lap over here, and I already know what Baba's feelings would be here. So in all of this, and I came away from that weekend and was reflecting on this business of truth, and then began to see how it was affected, how it came up. I just tell you very simply, every time that something, a decision would come up of even modest importance, I would do a full stop and reflect, at least for a second or two, to see how that vow of absolute honesty in daily living applied to this situation. Just trying to true myself so I could be faithful to what I had vowed to Baba. And then I began to see over a period of time that what this was doing was having an enormous effect on samskaric energy. Now, isn't that absolutely incredible? You know, I think we brought up a little bit, didn't we, Mr. Pillar, something about the provisional ego yesterday. Did we discuss the provisional ego just a
Just
little?
for a moment,
Just-
very
Yes.
in the beginning.
Yeah.
Are you on the provisional ego? Because if it's another question, I want to quickly go on to provisional ego
Me, it was
and its
true.
relationship.
It
But
was truing. I just didn't
Truing.
understand the word and what you meant by it, but.
by truing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that should be brought up right now.
It's a wonderful word.
It's a wonderful word. Have you ever seen a builder? I guess this happened when I was a little kid. They got better instruments, but they had a long string with a lead weight at the bottom of it, and he'd hang it up on a nail somewhere or another. And this vertical line hanging down was how he had to get the beams, the support beams, erected into place. So every once in a while, he'd pull this out and see whether a very important beam was true to the vertical. And this is truing what goes on in being, avoiding falsehood, being honest, has to do with being true to the truth. And one of the very, very best ways that I know about doing it, is stop, be quiet inside of yourself, and trust an inner sense to give you an idea. Because I think we've got what I call a sentinel, S-E-N-T-I-N-E-L, function inside of ourselves, which has got a tremendous truing function. It knows what we're about to do and about to say, and it can get a warning word in, or a suggestion very, very quickly. So a truing function to me is very important in this whole question of falsehood, honesty, and so on. But also, one of the very, very important functions is going to get back over to that famous last message on the alphabet board, where Baba gets into this business of forming inner links with real companions. And to me, one of the most important functions of a real companion is that you can get an independent sense of truing from another individual in a highly loaded emotional situation, or maybe even your own inner sentinel is going to get shut off base. This may strike you as being, I know this is a terribly loaded subject and it raises all sorts of things, but please let me go on just a little bit longer with this, and I'll try to bring it back to the provisional ego, and where I saw how Baba used this vow in relation to the provisional ego function. It was amazing to me. So, at any rate, if you have made real inner links and real companionship relationship to 2 or 3 or 4 people in your life, and it doesn't have to be necessarily in a Baba group. Several of the most important ones to me were in my professional petroleum life. But when you take an individual into your own being, and they take you into their being, you will trade punches back and forth. And if I come out with some sort of a statement, and my friend looks a little bit askance at me and said, well, Don, that sounds a little bit off to me, and is willing to share his or her sense of where the honesty of the matter is, the true line lies. This is an enormously important function. And this happens best and most dependably when you have made real inner links and real companionship relations with 2, 3, 4 other people. And this is one of the central principles of what the last message in the alphabet board is all about. Now, I got to go back just quickly now, I hope, to one other thing as how I began to see this happen. I said, I almost immediately developed the necessity, before I jumped into action in an important or even a semi-important situation, to stop and just quickly check, you might say, the inner man, the inner sense of the truth within myself. And I found this was necessary to begin to deal effectively and realistically with my vow to try to be honest in situations. I couldn't just plunge immediately into it. No, I found out that most of the time I had acted in a stupid fashion and a semi-dishonest, where I had a lot of Sanskaric pushes and pulls all over the map, which were getting me involved in making snap judgments and snap actions. So some way I found I had to pause and be neutral and just sort of check the inner man. Now, this is terribly difficult when you're in a fast-moving conversation or a fast-moving situation to stop even for a second or two, but it was absolutely necessary. And then I would know, I've got to make a decision, say something, do something. But the thing that began to strike me was that I began to notice that as I did this, my sense of being in control and at ease within myself was improving very, very rapidly, and it was a very important factor to me. So I began to say to myself, is it possible that somewhere or another, when I do this, that in some manner, a portion of the samskaric energy, which is just anxious to get out and express itself, to spend itself up, as the Nantali always put it, and to spend itself up quickly, because it's a knot of energy, and a ball of energy wants to dissipate itself, you know. It needs a lightning rod in order to ground it. And what you try to do, and I try to do in this situation, is get it out of the system and let it express itself as rapidly as possible. This is where the desire factor comes in. The desire is quickly, let me eat it, quickly, let me tell that person off, quickly, let's buy that, and so on, you see. All of these quickly immediate things. And what happens is when samskaric energy is spent up almost effectively at once in the situation, it's just then wound back up into another knot of energy. And it's stored away in the mental body, and it's probably picked up a little bit more emotional energy, so the habit gets deeper and deeper, and the desires get deeper and deeper. Does this make any sense to you? Yeah, we all know about this. We're honest with ourselves. We see this happening in our own lives. And we know this is what we're dealing with in this horrible word samskara that Bob has tossed into our midst.
Don, could you possibly give a practical example of what you just described?
Well,
Chocolate cake?
I'll go back to my original one because it was so real to me. I think I had for the first time a chocolate cream cake, a really luscious one. And it was just so terribly good. Next time I was around one of them, I bought it from the place I went by. And I just saw myself again and again and again, you know, reinforcing this love of the chocolate cream cake. Sounds ridiculous, but it is just so simple and human and primitive that I think we all recognize what goes on. But then, finally, you know, I began to say, well, am I going to go on all of my life eating chocolate cream cakes more and more often and gaining more and more weight and so on? So I just said, well, somewhere or another, I've got to stop this. And so the next time I went by a chocolate cream cake place, I said to myself, should I? Shouldn't I? I stopped my action, and then I take you to a funny little sort of a dream night, not terribly long, right? I woke up at 3:30 in the morning, you know, as I tell you, every once in a while I have to do to go to the bathroom. And when I come back from the bathroom, something would very, very often clearly occur to me. And on this particular occasion, I've been thinking about something to do with samskaras and so on. And then all of a sudden, I thought about something which made me just terribly angry that had happened the previous day. So as I was crawling into bed, no electric lights on at that particular point, just enough filtering light coming in the window so I could see dim outlines of doors and windows and the bedpost and so on, and even maybe a little bit of the end of my nose. A very strange thing began happening to me, and it was, I could see something that looked like just sort of the little wispy tendrils of fog coming up from around my face. And I said, this is crazy, I never saw anything like this before. Am I going nuts here? And it just sort of whispered up, whispered up. I was angry as all get out because of what I had remembered that had occurred the previous day. But because I was so enraptured by this sort of little wispy fog stuff coming up around my face, I said, somewhere or another, could it possibly be like an electron microscope fog chamber what I'm seeing is energy from the samskaras that is activated. And of course, I'm not going to do anything about it. I'm not going to call up the guy now at 3:30 in the morning and call him out. So I've got to get this under control. But as I watched this and my anger subsided, some of these wispy little candles just sort of drifted off into space. And I said to myself, is this a demonstration of samskaric energy when it is awakened? And is this a demonstration also of the manner in which, if samskaric awakened energy is stopped in its track and not immediately re-encapsulated in another energetic action, is there some of it that it dissipates? And with that in mind, I began to say, well, now when I stop to think of it through the years, I have been stopping because of my vow of honesty and daily living to Baba. I've been stopping a lot of situations with a lot of psychic energy. And it is very strange, but my life seems to be enormously more peaceful and under control than it was years ago. I associate the two things, and I believe absolutely that each time, for whatever reason, you stop the samskaric energy action, samskaric energy action from being acted out. But for the moment, the energy is awakened, it is alive, and some of it, just like a bit of a cloud or a bit of a fog bank on a sunny day, some of it dissipates. So finally, and certainly you have noticed this in your own situation, if you say, I better think a bit about this, and you manage to hold yourself up from impetuous action, when you then decide, well, now I reflected on this, now it's time for me to go ahead and make a decision and put it into action. If you have successfully held it up for a little bit, when you finally make your decision and put it in, you feel a lot better and a lot more under control. And it's because I feel convinced it is because a significant part of the samskaric energy has been dissipated from that situation. Now, finally back over to you.
Yes, I don't want to change your course here, but going back to that session where Baba was talking about honesty, what he means by honesty, was that the end of it, or did he have anything else to say, and are you going to get
That
back
was the essential part of it. When he had gotten to this business, it must be a just proportion between the positive and negative, if you elect to get into some of what you know. That was the end of it. And to my knowledge, he never went into a further elaboration of it.
I didn't hear the last sentence that you said that Baba said.
That when he finished this just proportion between the positive and negative, he ended the conversation, that as well, and we all went our respective ways. And I never knew in my presence that he discussed it further. That was the end of the story. Yeah.
Are we going to talk more about the juice aspect of this?
Talk more about the aspect of what I missed.
Judas function.
Oh, Judas is very much front and center here.
Well,
absolutely.
I was just going to say...
Could I finish provisional ego and then we'll go back to Judas, because it's a terribly important factor for us this second day. One of the things that then became clear to me was when I had been first struck in the discourses by Baba's discussion that a great master deliberately promotes this inner link with you. Baba, or especially Mani, talked about Baba getting out his fishing pole and trying to catch a particularly nice fish on the hook and line. You know? So it's probably a realistic simile, but always, it was very clear that Baba was trying as rapidly and deeply as possible to effect a very deep emotional link with you. And then if you read the discourses, Baba said that when this begins to happen to the point where the fish that has been hooked develops such a deep bond of inner sympathy for the position of the master, so that gradually the welfare and the happiness of the master becomes more important than his own wishes and desires, then the devotee forms a provisional ego of the will and the happiness of the master. During this time, his own personal ego is set aside. And Baba said, during that time, the personal ego goes through a fracture, a fissuring, that is so fundamental that when, let's say, one reassumes the burden of one's personal ego, however it may happen, then it never regains its original strength. So Baba's simple term says, if this can happen to you, it is one of the greatest assists that can occur on the spiritual path. So this impressed me tremendously. But then, when I saw, I love Baba, as you well know, deeply. But nevertheless, in addition to any personal transfer, he stuck me in a situation where these decisions coming up, you know, again and again and again during the course of a daily life. So he put in an additional provisional ego into this, which would stop my own desire pattern. Am I being honest with Baba in this action? And this, to me, is one of the most incredible provisional ego mechanisms that I've ever run into. It is a provisional ego, because being faithful to my vow to MeherBaba was more important than hurry up and getting the situation out of the way and getting it dispensed with, or get the guy under control, or whatever it was, you know. But this was again and again, every single day. And I began to think, now, heavenly days, I still have to think about this before I use my words. It's incredible how Baba used that vow of honesty in two spheres, my personal daily life and in my business daily life. So he had me coming and going 20 hours a day. But now then you think of another thing that should be important to you. He gives us a few helpful hints in the discourses especially. One of the ones that I love the most is the one about selfless service. You remember in one of the discourses he said there are various things that you can do to help your progress on the path. And he said one of the most effective is to do selfless service for others. And you remember what he then went on and said, of course, when you first try to do it, you find that even though you're trying to do a good act and help a person, your own ego, when you sit and honestly see what's going on, is right in the middle of the thing, and you're tempted to say, well, I'm not meant for selfless service. I've got such a strong ego that it's my ego that is serving, and the self is right there. It's not selfless at all. It's ego full of service. Ego full of service. But then he goes on, and oh, this is so beautiful. But he said, however, real selfless service is so much an intrinsic part of the truth of one's own being that if you keep persisting, then the truth of what you really, really are like inside gradually comes through. So it is worth, and you must persist, and gradually you will start rendering real selfless service. What is selfless service? Putting your own desire pattern in abeyance while you're helping this other person, and for that period of time, the real help that they need is more important to you than some of your own personal problems. So it's a beautiful provisional ego tool in turn. And when you start analyzing some of the helpful hints that Baba gives us in his various writings, so many of them are based, without saying it, on the principle of the provisional ego principle. You're doing something that is more important than even your own desire habit pattern. That is the basic principle of the provisional ego. And it extends into so many fields. We did quite a long series in one of the European Baba groups, ferreting out various things where different people said, yeah, there's really selfless service. I mean, the provisional ego is erected. This is, after all, where the principle of really great human love comes in. Really great love says, I love that person so much that their happiness, their welfare means more to me than what I want. It just happens to be a fact. I never thought it would happen to me, but it happens to be true. So this is the spiritual principle. The loved one becomes the provisional ego for one, and it is terribly real. Adele?
Well, yeah, I think that concept of a certain degree, there has to be there's a little sacrifice. So that, I mean, people, I think.
But you don't term it sacrifice at that point, Adele. The word sacrifice is meaningless in relation to what you know you want to do for the person.
No, I meant sacrificing like you just said. You think more good points than others, less of their bad points. You wish well for them, even at the
But when you really love somebody, I don't think you're even thinking of good and bad.
It's not a sacrifice.
Yeah, there's no sacrifice in it when you really love somebody deeply, deeply, deeply.
Yeah, it becomes
Real
funny.
love.
It becomes funny.
Incidentally, you remember Baba says, you can look for real love for a lifetime, but it never comes except as the gift of grace from the Master. But in order to win the grace of the Master, you've got to earn it. He's a realist, isn't he? What did you want to add? Yes, please.
I don't know if I want to add, but I do have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
I like.
Excuse me, it's Mahu, isn't it?
Yeah.
The light shining straight in my eyes, Mahu. So I didn't recognize you. Excuse me, sweetie pie.
Yes. I wanted, actually, I'm following your talk, and I wanted to connect this, the unwinding process of samskaras, or that knots of energy, and its relation to the provisional ego. So, once we refer to provisional ego, and as you said, keeping your words toward the Master and having him to be more important than your own false self and so forth.
But you don't try to do it. If you try to do it, you don't get much of it anywhere. But when it happens naturally, then it's proven.
Okay, so not to try to do it, but when it happens naturally.
Yeah.
It might have its own level of time to really becomes naturally. So first maybe one has to try a little bit.
That's when he's going through the fishing act.
Yeah, fishing act. So my question is that I have this difficulty, this burst of energy, this sanskaric form of energy that you just described and what you observed in your dream. I've had a similar experience, and how would I prevent from this to be really happening, and
Prevent the samskara from exerting itself egotistically?
Yes, exerting itself egotistically and becomes another action with it, so it's going to be deeply rooted, deeply, it's going to be going deeply more and more and more. So, you did talk also about the pause. I can't do it. I mean, with some of the Baba calls it low desires, like anger, for example. I have some of that. Is that pause? I've tried, but that pause, it can't happen because this just goes out.
Yeah.
So, how could one?
How do you do something before the boom happens?
Yes.
That's a very, very good point. I'm afraid you hit a point where I did an awful lot of inner observing and experimenting for some years. Do you think we got the time for it, Mr. Kilder?
5 minutes.
5 minutes. Okay. Mahu, we're going to try to cover about 20 years of learning and experimenting in 5 minutes. One of the first things that Mercer Martin did to me was say, Don, one of the things that you will see happening, even though you decide to become a Sufi, suddenly you'll have a burst of anger. And then you'll be shocked because you'll say, if I'm a good Sufi, I ought to get these bursts of anger. And she says, actually, it is terribly important for you to come to grips with this, because one of the things that wastes tremendous amounts of spiritual energy is just these tremendous, uncontrolled outbursts of emotion. So she did. She said that to me. And I don't think it could have been a week after she had implanted this warning in me, when all of a sudden something happened in my work in Standard Oil, California, that just made me madder than a hatter. So no sooner had I gotten madder than a hatter and gotten it out of my system, I said, that's exactly what Mercer Martin told me about. And here I am, I just let this happen. Boom, as you said, it happened. And all of this energy got used up in it. And when I was getting calmed down, I was still shaking like a leaf. And I said, boy, that took an awful lot of energy. Here was my spiritual demonstration. What am I going to do about it? So Mahu said, well, what did you do about it? Maybe it's going to have to take 5.5 minutes now. I have to be so realistic when I jump into these things, Mahu. So here I was saying, what am I going to do about it? And so next time, again, I just got uncontrollably enraged. And the second time I said, good heavens, Stevens, you don't learn things fast. You haven't done anything about it. You just got uncontrollably mad, and you did it exactly the same way. What are you going to do about it? So the third time, when I sensed that a situation was coming along, when I might get as mad as a hatter, I said to myself, this time I'm going to take a look at the mechanism of what goes on here. This is my analytical mind functioning. Well, I'm built that way. So along comes the situation that's getting closer and closer and closer, and finally the action happens. And I look inside precisely at the moment that it happens, when in the past 2 times, I just uncontrollably instantly got angry. But this time, I noticed, as I was looking inside in the milliseconds after the situation occurred, I noticed strangely enough that there was a short, but terribly short period of time before the adrenaline gland apparently pumped enough of this into the blood system, and then all my arm waving and so on took over. There was a millisecond or 2 when I was just absolutely calm after the event had happened. And I said, well, now that's interesting, terribly interesting. I wonder if there's any way to preserve that couple of milliseconds. And to make the long story short, so I could get under his time deadline, I gradually became more, and I forced myself to be aware for that millisecond, and to see if I could sort of push it a little bit further, and a little further, a little further, a little further. Discipline, self-control, internal, refusing to allow the luxury of getting madder than a hatter. It meant something to me because my spiritual progress, I knew, depended upon things like that. That meant a lot. That was my provisional ego, you see. I didn't even know the word at that point. But doing something real in relation to Mercer Martin meant something to me. So I observed. And can you imagine, after several years, I could take an explosive situation in my own personal life, and I could postpone the adrenaline for hours or even days.
So you're calling that the provisional ego too? That moment.
No, my provisional ego was what Mercer Martin had pointed out to me, that if I was going to do something real as a vowed Sufi on the spiritual path, I had somewhere or another to deal with these. And so that meant so much to me to do something real that I forced myself to observe the next situation that came along. And that's when I made the breakthrough observation. There were 1 or 2 milliseconds there, and then I expanded it. But the provisional ego was my deep desire to do something real under Mercer Martin. She and the path meant that much to me.
So the provisional ego versus reactive mind versus...
My reactive mind wanted to explode immediately. That's what my ego wanted to do.
The ego, okay.
Yeah, my dear old ego. Ken, what have you got?
I believe you call that millisecond, which is expanding, the neutral plateau.
Exactly. I called this then the neutral plateau that I had found in my own being, and that I could deliberately expand that neutral plateau. It became a tremendously meaningful phrase to me. I talked to myself about the neutral plateau. Don, get yourself on the neutral plateau quick. Hurry up and do it. It's a way of going about these things. If we do something real in something that means something real, we've got to find our own mechanisms that make sense to us. And when I discovered the milliseconds, I just suddenly had the picture of, oh, here I am on a terribly tough path, and just right there's a tiny pause that I can catch my breath, and then I can extend it, and I can extend it a little more. But that's it. Yes?
When I have a sense for that place.
Good for you. Great.
But for you, are there any thoughts happening at that time, or is the neutral plateau, you're suspending your thoughts about the situation then?
Everything is suspended at that moment. This gradually becomes a habit pattern that you put into effect when you sense a danger point. You put the habit pattern into effect, and then you decide how long you want to extend that neutral plateau on yourself. How much luxury you can give yourself before you got to go off and start to climb up. Somebody way back in.
Yes. Question, on this neutral plateau, does that involve, say for example, you feel...
Does it involve, and I missed a word, Steve.
Okay, I'll speak up a little bit.
Yeah.
In your example of feeling explosive anger, reactive explosive anger, and one is wanting to stay in the neutral plateau, does that involve like just suppressing the emotion, the anger?
I observed naturally happening a neutral plateau. It was a fact in my being. And then I found that I could deliberately, not with a lot of pushing or pulling even, just say, I want to extend that a little bit. And then I gradually developed the habit of being able to extend it a bit more.